January 28, 1393. A masked ball at the Palace of Paris, as the dancers twirl in their extravagant costumes coated in pitch and linen, they suddenly burst into flames. Screams echo through the corridors. 4 nobles perish in the fire, and right in the midst of this chaos, the King of France narrowly escapes death on what would become the strangest and most terrifying night in history. But what if the king had survived? Or what if he had lost his life there? Would that have been better for France? Let's find out together. When he fully took control of the government, the entire people called him Dear Charles. In 1380, this young man, who ascended to the French throne, was only 11 years old. His father, Charles V, the man the people called Wise Charles, was the one who had saved the country from a 10-year war against England, filled the treasury, and restored the palace to its former glory. And now, everything rested on this child's shoulders. Years after giving birth to Charles, his mother, Joan of Bourbon, suffered a mental breakdown. At the time, they called it God's punishment. His mother died 2 days after giving birth to her last child. Charles was only 9 years old. 2 years later, his father also passed away. Now 11 years old, he was a child forced to bear the burden of a kingdom alone. Yet he was not entirely alone. He had his uncles, the Duke of Anjou, the Duke of Berry, the Duke of Burgundy. They were not there to protect him, but to share power in his name. France's treasury could only withstand this for 10 years. Taxes skyrocketed, the people rose up. In 1388, when Charles turned 20, he was fully aware of everything. He stood up at a council meeting and dismissed his uncles. He brought back his father's trusted advisors. Taxes were lowered. Flags were waved in the streets of Paris for the first time. They now addressed him by a different name, Dear Charles. His meeting with Isabeau of Bavaria was a coincidence, a wedding ceremony, a Bavarian duke and his beautiful daughter. The royal advisors approved. But it wasn't the advisors who made Charles's decision. He wanted to marry her the moment he saw her. And 3 days later, the wedding took place. These were the happiest days of Dear Charles. He didn't know that either, because there was something he had inherited from his mother. Not just her beautiful features, but a darkness growing silently in the depths of his mind. But right at the heart of those bright days, something was taking root that no one could see. And on that scorching summer day in 1392, deep within a forest, everything changed. August 5th, 1392, was one of the hottest days in France. King Charles was marching to Brittany with his army to seek retribution for the assassination attempt on his loyal friend and commander-in-chief, Olivier de Clisson. The Duke of Brittany had ordered the assassination, and the king was determined to punish him. But when the army entered the wooded terrain near Le Mans, those around him noticed that something was wrong with Charles. His speech was sometimes filled with nonsensical details, and he was running a fever. Suddenly, a man burst out of the forest. A man with tattered clothes, barefoot. He grabbed the reins of the horse and shouted loudly, "Do not go any further, noble king. Turn back. You are being betrayed." The guards dragged the man away. But he did not give up. For half an hour, he followed the army, repeating the same words until he fell and fainted. Charles's eyes were fixed on that man. Before long, the hand of a soldier in the front began to tremble. "Traitors, they want to hand me over," he shouted, and he began attacking the men closest to him, his own soldiers. The chaos lasted a few minutes. No one dared to stand up to the king. It is unknown how many knights lost their lives under that sword swinging wildly. Later, Charles fell into a coma. He could not be roused for days. By the time he was transported from the forest to Paris, he had become a completely different man. Physically, he had recovered. Everyone thought the matter had ended there. They assumed it was just a momentary lapse, a summer fling. But they were wrong, because 6 months later, the strangest scandal in French history would unfold. And this time, the walls would be engulfed in flames. The court physicians said that having a little fun would clear her mind. Queen Isabeau took this seriously. And on the night of January 28, 1393, she hosted a masked ball at the Hôtel Saint-Paul. One of the court nobles proposed a special idea. The king and 5 young nobles would take the stage as wild men. The ball began. The 6 wild men entered the hall, chained together. The guests were spellbound and entertained. Very few knew who was behind the masks. Then the door opened. He was trying to figure out who was who among the costumes. The flame leapt onto the costume of the nearest dancer. Within seconds, 5 men were engulfed in flames. Screams filled the hall. They couldn't escape. They couldn't remove their costumes. Tar was sticking to everything. 4 men lost their lives that night. The monastery chronicler, Michel Pintoin, recorded this scene with horror. Charles survived. Charles stood in the middle of the hall. The smell of burnt hair filled the air. His skin was unharmed, but his hands were trembling. That night went down in history as the Ball of the Burning Men, and the people of Paris rose up. How could the king have put himself in such danger with such a foolish spectacle? The authorities were forced to publicly apologize to the people. This fire did not merely claim the lives of 4 men. It burned something else as well. Within Charles's mind, a far stranger delusion rose from the ashes of this fire. A king made of glass. Months after the Ball of the Burning Men, Charles's fits began again. This time they were longer, more intense, and stranger. In the middle of 1393, for 6 months, he couldn't even remember his own name. When Queen Isabeau came to visit, he didn't know who she was, and often ordered her to leave. In 1395 to 96, he adopted a new identity. He had a figure of a lion pierced by a sword added to his coat of arms. For a time, he truly believed he was Saint George, but even this paled in comparison to the next delusion. One morning, Charles summoned his tailor. He placed a special order. Iron rods were to be sewn into his garments. Metal pieces would be embedded into the structure of each garment, like a skeleton. Because Charles now believed he was made of glass. This was a rare psychological disorder known as Glass Delusion. By the end of the Middle Ages, a few other cases had been documented in Europe. But the most famous and the most tragic was that of the king sitting on the throne of France. Historians believed this delusion was partly rooted in the clear glass that had recently been discovered during that era. Fragile, transparent, valuable, and this notion had completely taken over his world. Charles would not allow anyone to touch him. He avoided sudden movements. Fearing that the slightest movement might shatter him, he would sit motionless for hours on end. Every now and then, the fog in his mind would lift, and Charles would come to his senses. He saw what had become of his country, how the treasury had been plundered, how the palace had been divided. He saw it all, and then the darkness would descend once more. But this psychological collapse was not merely the tragedy of a single man. For France's most powerful dukes saw this void as an opportunity. On that cold November night in 1407, when a body was found in the streets of Paris, the kingdom was dragged into an even deeper darkness. Imagine a king sitting on his throne, yet completely unaware of it. This is precisely the situation a tyrant's army loves most. The 2 most powerful men in France, seizing this opportunity, faced off against each other. On one side, Louis, Duke of Orleans, the king's brother. On the other, Philip, Duke of Burgundy, also known as Philip the Bold. On November 23rd, 1407, the Duke of Orleans' body was found in the streets of Paris. True to his name, fearless John admitted to the deed without even denying it. He claimed he did it out of patriotism, arguing that Duke Louis of Orleans had betrayed the country by plundering it, presenting himself as one who had slain a tyrant. In the wake of these events, wars that would split France in 2 would begin, and the streets would be filled with weapons. The Armagnacs and the Burgundians. Speaking of opportunists, King Henry V of England turned this chaos to his advantage and emerged as the most powerful figure. His army, the most magnificent in the world, was completely bogged down in the mud at Agincourt in 1415. To protect his fragile body, a king had iron bars fitted. But to protect his nation, he could do nothing. He was forced to hand him over to a foreigner with his own signature. Before the ink on the peace treaty had even dried, Charles's health deteriorated severely. He spent his final years in the gloomy rooms of the Hôtel Saint-Paul, alone, unrecognized, sometimes without speaking to anyone for days on end. On October 21st, 1422, at the age of 53, he died. Although the madness of Charles VI remains a mystery that historians still debate, the most widely accepted theory was that he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. But medieval medicine did not know that term. They attributed it to the devil, poison, witchcraft, and curses. But this much we know: the Glass King's fragile mind truly shattered France. The final act of the 100 Years' War did not begin on a battlefield, but in a throne room, with the collapse of a mind. Ultimately, this helpless descent into madness, coupled with the English conquest of France, gave rise to a crisis of national identity at the very heart of France. History is often the product not of the strongest men, but of the most fragile moments. Would it have been better for France if the king had lived such a life, or if he had lost his life at the ball of the burning men? I look forward to your comments. In our next video on events that changed the course of history, I'll be back with an even more striking topic. Don't forget to stay tuned to confront the depths of history.